Brazil have won the World Cup 5 times, more than any other nation on earth. They are the only country to have appeared in every single World Cup ever played. They have produced Pelé, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Zico, Socrates, Garrincha, the most gifted collection of footballers any nation has ever assembled across any era. And yet in the entire history of the World Cup, every single time the tournament has been held outside South America, Brazil have failed to win it. 5 titles, every single one in the Americas. 0 in Europe. 0 in Asia. 0 in Africa. 0 anywhere else on Earth. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And the reason behind it goes far deeper than anyone has ever properly explained. This is the dark reason Brazil have never won a World Cup outside South America. Start with the geography. Brazil is the 5th largest country on the planet. Flying from Sao Paulo to London takes 12 hours. Flying from Sao Paulo to Zurich takes 13. When a World Cup is held in Europe, Brazil's players are traveling further from home than almost any other competing nation. But travel distance alone does not explain a pattern this consistent. European nations travel just as far to play in South America. Germany won in Mexico in 1986. Spain won in South Africa in 2010. France won in Russia in 2018. Distance is not the deciding factor. The deciding factor is something far more invisible and far more powerful. Sports scientist Dr. Fabio Branco, who has studied the physiological and psychological performance of Brazilian national team players across multiple international tournaments, has documented what he describes as an environmental dependency pattern in Brazilian football culture. His research identifies that Brazilian players perform at their statistical peak when surrounded by familiar sensory conditions: the heat, the humidity, the noise of a South American crowd, the style of football being played around them. When those conditions are absent, Brazilian players, particularly their most creative and technically gifted players, show measurable drops in decision-making speed, risk-taking frequency, and what Branco calls expressive confidence. The willingness to attempt the kind of improvised, instinctive, high-risk skill that makes Brazilian football extraordinary. Think about what Brazilian football actually is. It is not a tactical system. It is a culture. It is the product of decades of street football played on concrete courts called peladas, where survival depends on creativity, improvisation, and the kind of close control that comes from playing with a ball in tight spaces from the age of 4. Brazilian football is expressive by nature. It is joyful by nature. It is free by nature. And that freedom is deeply connected to environment, to feeling at home, to feeling like the crowd understands the kind of football you are trying to play. Now think about European World Cups. The crowds are different. The pitches are different. The weather is different. The entire sensory context is different. And the football played around Brazil in European tournaments has historically been more defensive, more organized, more physically confrontational than the football Brazil encounters in South American competition. Brazil's greatest players have always thrived when given space to express themselves. European World Cup environments have consistently produced conditions where that space is harder to find and harder to use. Look at the evidence tournament by tournament, 1966, England. Brazil are the defending champions. They are eliminated in the group stage. Pelé is kicked so brutally by Bulgarian and Portuguese defenders that he cannot finish the tournament. He leaves the pitch in tears and swears he will never play in a World Cup again. The physical aggression of European football in that era was something Brazilian players were simply not prepared for. 1974. West Germany. Brazil finish 4th. Johan Cruyff's Netherlands and the German hosts both play a style of total football that is tactically sophisticated in ways that nullify Brazil's individual brilliance. Brazil's manager tries to make them more defensive and more European. The result is a Brazil team that is neither expressive enough to win through creativity, nor organized enough to win through structure. They fall between two identities. 1982, Spain. Perhaps the most heartbreaking of all. Brazil have the most beautiful team in the tournament. Zico, Socrates, Falcao Jr. A team that plays football so elegant and so joyful that neutral fans around the world are still talking about it 40 years later. They are eliminated by Italy in the second group stage. Paulo Rossi scores a hat-trick. Brazil need only a draw to qualify, but play as if they cannot conceive of playing for a draw. They attack. Italy counter-attack. Brazil lose 3-2. The freedom and expressiveness that makes Brazilian football sublime also makes it vulnerable to a team willing to be pragmatic and ruthless. Sports psychologist Dr. Andrew Doyle, whose research on national football identity and tournament performance has been presented at multiple UEFA coaching conferences, argues that the 1982 elimination represents the clearest example of what he calls the Brazilian paradox. The qualities that make Brazil the most gifted footballing nation on earth, creativity, freedom, expressive risk-taking, are simultaneously the qualities that make them vulnerable in high-stakes knockout environments where a single moment of defensive vulnerability ends your tournament. 1990, Italy. Brazil lose to Argentina on penalties in the round of 16. A single Diego Maradona pass, a single Claudio Caniggia goal, out. 2006, Germany. Brazil are favourites. They have Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Kaká, Adriano. One of the most talented squads ever assembled. They lose to France in the quarter-finals. Zinedine Zidane controls the match. Brazil's attack, so devastating in the group stage, produces almost nothing against a well-organized French defensive structure. Ronaldinho, the best player in the world at that time, is completely anonymous. 2014, Brazil. The one exception that proves the rule in reverse. Brazil host the tournament on home soil. And they produce the most catastrophic performance in World Cup history. The 7-1 loss to Germany in the semi-final. On Brazilian soil. In front of Brazilian fans. The pressure of hosting, the weight of expectation in their own country, produces a psychological collapse that mirrors what normally happens to them in Europe, but happens instead at home. Dr. Branco's research notes a crucial distinction here. The 2014 collapse was not caused by unfamiliar environment. It was caused by unbearable familiar expectation. The same psychological vulnerability, triggered by a different kind of pressure. The pattern across all of this is consistent. When Brazilian football is free, it is the most beautiful thing sport has ever produced. When it is pressured, constrained, or placed in an environment that disrupts its natural expressive confidence, it becomes vulnerable in ways that no amount of individual talent can fully compensate for. The solution, as 3 coaches across 3 decades have tried and failed to implement, is to find a way to give Brazilian players the tactical discipline to be defensively resilient without destroying the creative freedom that makes them extraordinary. It is one of the hardest problems in football management, because the thing you are trying to protect is not a tactic or a system. It is a feeling, a way of playing, a relationship with the ball that is built into Brazilian footballers from the moment they first kick one on a concrete court in Rio or Sao Paulo or below horizont. Brazil will go to the next World Cup in 2026, co-hosted by the United States, Canada and Mexico, back in the Americas. They will be favorites. They have been favorites at every tournament for 60 years. And somewhere in that squad will be players of extraordinary talent who play the most beautiful football on earth. The question, as it has always been, is whether the environment will be right for them to play it freely enough to win. The dark reason Brazil have never won a World Cup outside South America is not bad luck. It is not coincidence. It is the tension at the heart of Brazilian football itself, between the freedom that makes them great and the vulnerability that freedom creates, between the joy of expression and the ruthlessness that winning at the highest level demands. They have never fully resolved that tension away from home. And until they do, the pattern will continue. If this changed the way you see football, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find this channel. And if you want the real story behind the moments everyone else misses, subscribe. There is a lot more where this came from.